Thank you everyone once again for joining us on day 2 of the Smart Protein Summit. As you just heard from Mr. Siraj Chaudhry, former MD of Cargill, we do need to have a bold vision for how we advance the space, particularly across the supply chain, and think about transcending an early adopter market and going to the true mass market. And that means that we have to be really bold and ambitious about how we build a roadmap for the sector. Our next session has some really wonderful panelists who've done great work building entire industries, innovation ecosystems, and building roadmaps and national plans like this in other countries and in India. Before we begin, and I hand over to our moderator, Satvika, I'm going to present a couple of slides on some very exciting work we've been doing with Deloitte India to lay the groundwork for this national plan in India. So I'm just going to share my screen here a little bit. Great. So as a quick reminder of what we're talking about here, as the need is very apparent in the year 2021 on the back of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as on the back of several convenings that we've had over the course of this year, the UN Food System Summit, the Global Conference of Parties on Climate 26 that happened just last week. Our principal question at GFI India and in the smart protein sector is, how will we feed 10 billion people by the year 2050, 1/6 of whom will still be in India, through means that do not continue to break the planet, but in fact usher in a newer, greener economy that stewards livelihoods, stewards farmer welfare, stewards nutrition, and stewards flourishing for billions of people. If we're going to do this, we have to think far beyond incremental gains, and we have to think in terms of paradigm shifts. We need to think in terms of building an industry of the future, one which is far more resilient to climate change, to public health crises, and which of course reduces the risk of these existential risks in the first place. So in order to create a roadmap for this space, we've been working over the last several months with Deloitte India to put together an economic analysis of what smart protein could mean for India's economic future. We've done rigorous modeling, we've done deep dives with industry experts from India and across the world, across science, business, and policy. And we're still putting the finishing touches to the analysis. We're going to release it in pieces over the next several months. But I wanted to give you a very exciting snapshot of what we've done and what it means for India from an economic standpoint here at the Smart Protein Summit. So as we analyzed the industry, we decided to break out into different categories of smart protein, of course, plant-based, fermentation-derived, and cultivated proteins. And I'm going to give you some snippets from only the plant-based meat side of things. What we found as we analyzed different scenarios of how much growth the industry could have over the next decade at different levels of support from industry, government, and academia, we found that the market for plant-based protein, plant-based meat specifically rather, is sizable in India. It ranges from about Indian rupees 1,280 crores in the base case scenario to about 3,427 crores in the upside scenario, where more interventions have been implemented to take it from the early adopter market to the mass market. This is about USD 202 to $461 million. Additionally, of course, we're seeing that the demand for these products is already very high in overseas markets. And so when you look at the export potential, there might be an even bigger opportunity, particularly if there is significant work done by government and industry to make this a pillar of our economy, as well as make it a primary export of India and India's culture to the rest of the world. Other countries are, of course, already doing this. We saw Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the UK, say a couple of weeks ago that alternative protein can be the next great British export, and we think India should be competing similarly. So the export potential of plant-based meat might be even larger and could range all the way up to over $1 billion over the next decade by 2030. Now, when we analyze what this means for the economy in general, so not just revenues and not just consumption, but also in terms of secular growth across the value chain, only plant-based meat could contribute significantly to India's economy to the tune of about 3,500 crores all the way up to 9,700 crores, which is once again over $1 billion. And then finally, what this means for jobs, which is a major question that many would have about the smart protein sector and how we're actually going to build the talent pool and actually service all of these needs. When we analyze a lot of different types of jobs, whether it's manufacturing jobs, research jobs, etc., even policy jobs, we've seen that there is a significant need for talent to enter this space, and it could create nearly 50,000 jobs in the base case scenario and well over 100,000 jobs in the upside scenario by 2030. How this tracks with global projections is we've put up some slides here on the screen. We put up some numbers here on the screen, excuse me, where if you look at any of the numbers that have been come up by organizations like Bloomberg, UBS, JP Morgan, UBS, JP Morgan, any of the organizations that do this day in, day out for a living, they've modeled out that plant-based meat, only plant-based meat, could be worth anywhere from $74 billion to roughly $370 billion by 2035 globally. And we're also seeing other categories, of course, like cultivated meat, that would also be in multiple billions of dollars globally. It's important to remember that all the modeling we're doing here doesn't even account for the gains that we're having as a result of offsetting the impacts of climate change. India, as we all know, is particularly vulnerable to some of these existential risks like climate change, public health, and we've seen other research from Deloitte that says that India will be losing about $35 trillion US by 2070 to climate inaction if we do not act. Of course, it's really, really important to note as well that we have other issues that threaten the safety as well as the flourishing of our population, like malnourishment, both undernutrition as well as overnutrition, like diseases of affluence, diabetes, etc. We've also seen over the last couple of years what public health risks like pandemics can do to our economy. This is an image of quite literally pandemic refugees traveling hundreds or thousands of miles or kilometers back to their villages. The COVID-19 pandemic really brought our economy to a halt. And of course, we do have to safeguard the welfare of our farmers, who are among the most vulnerable populations to climate change. So we have to think about, as we build this new economic sector, how it's going to impact each and every one of these stakeholder groups and make sure that, of course, we're building a sunrise industry that can steward their interests. And lastly, I know I've put up a number of numbers on a screen here, but I just want to highlight that everything we're describing is not inevitable. All of these numbers, all of these jobs, all of these scenarios will demand industry, academia, and government to come together in a big way. If we're going to create a multi-billion-dollar industry, and of course, I've only described plant-based meat, the number will be much larger than that when you include all other categories. We really have to come together and go mission mode on all of this. And that's why I'm very glad to introduce Satvika Mahajan, our moderator here, who's going to bring forth our panelists and talk about some of the things that we can do and what they're doing in their various spheres to build out a mission for smart protein.
Thanks for highlighting the fascinating insights from the economic analysis, Varun. We're excited to bring this report out soon with Deloitte and keen to follow that up with focused groundwork with the stakeholders. To all the attendees of the Smart Protein Summit from all over the world, sitting here in Mumbai, I welcome all of you to the first panel of Day 2. We have an exciting day ahead of us, full of introspection about the critical areas to develop the industry. And our current panel will dive deep into what is needed to build the industry from scratch and get it over the finish line. To help us peel back the layers and lay down that roadmap, we're bringing together three fantastic visionary experts. I'm sure my panelists will forgive me for the brevity, but we have a lot of ground to cover in today's panel. So first we have Anya Eldan. She's Vice President and Head of Startup Division and Business Development at the Israel Innovation Authority, one of the most successful government agencies in the world, responsible for stimulating industrial research and development and seeding the deep tech and entrepreneurial ecosystem in the country. We have Anand Ramanathan. He's a partner of customer and marketing practice at Deloitte India with deep expertise and experience across retail, agribusiness, and FMCG. And finally, we have Arun Seth. He's a hugely respected corporate veteran, investor, and board member and advisor at dozens of organizations, including public companies, Jubilant Pharmova Limited, Narayana Health, etc. There are too many to name. He'd been very active with the government and regulators on shaping telecom policy and IT policy and being an elected member of NASSCOM for more than a decade. We're delighted to have you all today. And now, without further ado, let's jump right in. First, a quick round of questions about each or what each one of you does and your interest or involvement in smart protein. Anya, you're a leader in one of the most prolifically innovative government agencies in the world, the immensely respected Israel Innovation Authority. Could you please tell us a little bit about your work at the Innovation Authority, how it overlaps into the smart routine sector, and what personally excites you about this space?
Knew it was going to happen. Thank you so much for inviting me, and this is a pleasure. I hope next time it's in person in lovely Mumbai. The Israel Innovation Authority is a government agency. We spent about $500 million US to support innovation, and our goals are completely economic. We want to create a strong economy through innovation. We usually work bottom up. So we support applied research, startups, innovation in large companies. Companies submit proposals, we make decisions. In some cases, we also work top down, and that's the work about building ecosystems, and this is part of my responsibility. So I will give a couple examples before I come to proteins. We've led for the last 3 years the bioconvergence revolution, which culminates in a national program that's going to be announced soon. This is a convergence of biology and engineering that's really changing healthcare industry, but also the food tech. And you'll see that a lot of alternative protein technologies are actually exactly there on the verge of biology and engineering. So now we're leading also a climate tech program. Again, not to give any preference to a particular field, but to look at the ecosystem, see what are the roadblocks, and what we as a government can help. And of course, regulation always comes on top, but there's also research. And the exciting things about alternative proteins, and we'll talk about it more, it started as a food tech industry that we started building about 7 years ago. 7 years ago, there was no such thing as food tech. Nobody thought of food as technology. And now it's one of the most vibrant technology and high-tech scenes. And an alternative protein, of course, is the culmination. It's the best part of it because it's the most growth part of it. What excites me about alternative proteins, and we started working together with GFI Israel on it about a year and a half ago. What excites me is, first of all, this is going to change our world. Not only on the climate side, I will permit myself a personal note. I've been vegan for 10 years. And I think on every ethical, economic, and climate environmental ground, this is a breakthrough. This is a revolution. I'm so proud to be part of it.
Thank you so much. We'll move on to Arun now. Arun, you've been a key advisor and leader in everything from establishing the telecom sector and the entrepreneurial system to sitting on the board of mega food corporations to the advisory board of TERI, which is the Energy and Resources Institute. What brings you to the smart routine sector and why would you be excited by it?
Thanks, Atvika. Your name is very appropriate for what Anya just said, being Satvik. And thank you, the GFI team, for giving me an opportunity to share my views. I am a total newbie into this space, unlike Anya and others. I got into it by accident. I've been in telecom and other things. And I got introduced to the space by my friend and batchmate Indra Nui, who spoke actually at this summit last year. And I was just curious as to what this was. And she introduced me to Bruce and to Varun, and so therefore, and I'm hooked to this. And coincidentally, I find that the Jubilant group, whose board I'm on, has also invested in this space. And I find that many of my friends in the Indian diaspora, like Nikki Pant and others, are also deep into this. So I personally see this as actually a triple or a 4 times whammy for what it is. Our generation needs to do something very serious about climate change mitigation, especially for the coming generations, as we are the ones who've benefited from the large-scale use of resources. And India still needs significant energy to lift its people out of poverty, so that we can meet our zero commitment goal of 2017. We are the leading world on solar, and it's clear that 1/3 of GHG emissions come from rearing animals for food. That's going to be hard to change, especially food habits. But that is the mission that we are on. This is not just about technology, it's about behavioral change, and we need to focus ourselves on that. As already said, this is a product that's very nascent on the Indian market. We see many regular brands coming in, but I see a very massive potential, even bigger than the domestic demand, to export these to the West, where the market is more mature. I see this as no different, and this is what excites me, than what I've been doing in the IT industry for the past 30 years. What did we do there? We took our abundant manpower, our so-called demographic dividend, and went aggressively after the Western market with onshore resources with companies like TCS, HCL, where I started with. And when telecoms became reliable, we started delivering it from offshore and gave an opportunity to bright young and women to earn a better living. And now we're getting into software products. In the same way, we have land, we are blessed with ample land, ample water. We just don't know how to use it properly. We produce vast amounts of agri products, but the value add is very limited. And I would say that if we can couple with the animal spirits of Indian entrepreneurs that we are well known for, I can see this as leading to livelihoods and enhancements for our farmers itself, which Varun mentioned. It's very much like the IT BPO industry, but it'll take time. I'm not a vegetarian, unlike some others here, but I see wellness for society as a positive outcome and a lower disease burden, as animal products and rearing are very possible sources of disease for us, and the pandemic has shown us that. But more importantly, the new tech in the space can mean food can remain fresh longer than before, and we can even balance nutrients. India is actually calorie rich, but nutrient poor, so we can fix all that. And a couple of other small points that we can build tech which is affordable. I work in the health tech sector with Dr. Devi Shetty and others, and we can build health tech which is affordable, not just for the rich. So I see this is a very big opportunity. And just as a fun fact, one of the key technologies for creating these proteins is fermentation, which has not much evolved over the centuries. We can work on that. And by the way, we can even evolve a product which keeps us healthy and high at the same time. It's easier said than done. But we need to do all hands to the wheel to make this ecosystem happen.
Thank you so much for that, Arun. Anand, let's move on to you. It's been a pleasure working with you and your colleagues on the economic analysis. Would you tell us about how you and Deloitte are thinking about this space, including the smart protein industry, but also the broader climate space?
Thanks, Satvika, and thank you for having me here. It's a wonderful opportunity, and it was wonderful working with all of y'all over the past 2 months to look at this opportunity and see how it's going to evolve. Now, from a Deloitte standpoint, I've been working in this space now for over a decade in the food and agribusiness domain. And when we look at agribusiness, we primarily break it up into inputs, logistics, the entire processing space, and retail. And if we were to look at alternative proteins, it impacts all of these areas, right? And these are all areas where India needs capacity building and investment. So from an input standpoint, we have seen instances where there have been issues around sustainability in the way we use our inputs for crop cultivation and for other purposes around animal husbandry. So again, from a sheer sustainability standpoint, in terms of how much food needs to be grown to feed the billions of people in our country and beyond, it is going to be a big impact when you look at alternative proteins. Then we look at logistics. Everyone's aware of the kind of wastages that we see in the logistics space. And hence, the more amount of value addition and processing will lead to lower levels of wastage, right? And therefore, again, there is going to be a big impact on the agri-logistics space. Processing. Now, if I were to just look at the processed food space itself, again, one of the earlier speakers touched upon this. Value addition is critical for us to look at both adding jobs and improving the quality and safety of the food that gets consumed. And again, in this space, we are going to have an impact from alternative proteins. And on the retail side, this opens up new avenues, right? If you look at it globally, from a food services standpoint, we've seen alternative proteins have grown a lot in the food services and the hospitality space. So again, there could be wonderful culinary opportunities which come out of animal protein, of alternative proteins. So this will have an impact on all aspects of the food and agribusiness sector. It can also look at creating jobs. Typically, any sector like this, I mean, Deloitte itself has done a lot of work in this across the world. Prior to India, the past publication was in Australia, and where we saw that about 5 jobs get created for every direct job that gets created in the alternative protein sector, because a lot of the inputs that go into it are going to be domestically cultivated. And at the same time, we are going to be seeing intensity of job creation and also productivity improvements in the farm sector itself, which impacts a lot of different people in the agribusiness value chain, right? So we have an impact on the economy, we have an impact on jobs, and beyond all of that, from a sustainability standpoint, again, it's not possible for us to continue to practice food cultivation in the way that we have over the past many years, and therefore, from a sustainability standpoint, again, we are in favor of looking at alternative proteins to see how Deloitte can shape and influence the way these markets get built. Because like you've projected in the earlier slide, it's not so much about demand, but it's also how supply at times can create demand, and awareness building can go a long way in shaping that demand. So both from a supply standpoint and awareness building standpoint, Deloitte would want to work closely with all of you to see how we can promote sustainability through the growth of the alternative protein space.
Thank you so much. This was a great introduction and great context setting for the session. Over the course of this discussion, we are going to delve deeper into the areas that all of you mentioned. Let's start off with the need for bold action, particularly at this point when we have multiple issues facing us and the planet. Anya, let's start with you. Israel is playing a leading role in advancing the smart proteins space and has made it a key pillar of its food security and economic growth agenda. Could you give us an overview of the various collaborative efforts that are happening across industry, academia, and government in Israel to advance this sector? I'm going to repeat the most frequently used phrase. Yes.
I will say a few things. So first of all, building an ecosystem, our job is to build the industry. And food and alternative protein is a high-tech industry. It's based on deep science. It's a very, very profitable, potentially very productive area, high productivity area. So we want to continue creating this ecosystem through the public-private partnerships. And this is very important to understand. Governments cannot create things. Governments can facilitate, and they can try not to create too many roadblocks. At the end of the day, it's a private sector that's building the industry. We just help. So we do a lot in partnership with the private sector. And to build the ecosystem, the important thing is you really need to have all the components. One component is missing, it's not going to happen. So I will sort of give you an overview of all the components of the ecosystem that we've worked with and helped create, and a lot of it in partnership with GFI Israel. So first of all, deep science. So you have to go to the academic research, and normally you don't find people working on creating cultured meat. They have been researching biotech and life science, and they've been working on creating human tissue for healthcare applications. And you really have to open their eyes. So you have to create meetups between the food industry, the venture capital, people like activists like GFI, and the academic and the researchers, and open their eyes on possibilities on how their basic research can actually influence and be partnered with the alternative protein. And the most successful companies that we have in alternative protein field came out of academic labs and came out invariably out of healthcare, life science research. So the first step is getting them excited and getting them to see the opportunities. And transferring the science is not easy, because then you come to completely different set of economic problems. So getting one human organ created, you don't care how much it costs. Creating a steak, it really has to be cost effective. Completely different set of problems, but based on a very similar basic research. So that's the first thing. The second thing, you have to bring those academics together with the industry. So in order to create infrastructure for a very successful technological center, we create what we call consortia. We create consortia where we bring together some leading researchers, leading industry members, and getting them to work together to do applied research, to create infrastructure, to create generic research on which the industry can be built. We just a couple of weeks ago, we approved the cultured meat consortia that has some 10 researchers, 10 food tech companies and biotech companies, and they have a very ambitious plan to create this technology. And we've put something like $15 million in just this one consortia, because really all those problems on how you do things fast, how you do things on a large scale, how you do things that are healthy and can be approved by Food Administration. These are all very basic research questions. So that's the second thing. Venture creation is the next step. So those researchers are now excited. They have great ideas on how to turn their research into startups. Now you need somebody to help them create companies. And we have an incubator program that today has 3 food tech incubators that are actually doing that. And the way we encourage that, the government actually puts out a tender and invites private sector to bid on running an incubator. The group that wins actually has a 5 to 8 years license to create new companies. And we provide, as a government, we provide 85% of the initial funding. So we take on a lot of the risk, but they actually bring their knowledge, their experience. They have the management team, they have the facilities. A lot of time they build a joint lab for those startups, and they do the venture creations. We just create the tender and fund. And actually today is the end of our latest tender, and I'm sure we're going to see some proposals with alternative proteins in there. So exciting day for me. So apart from that, then you have to, of course, create infrastructure for scale, infrastructure for manufacturing. We have programs that support creating manufacturing facilities, innovative manufacturing technologies, and so forth. And we work with other ministries in the government, of course, to help encourage that. I will say the most important thing that has to be said, the regulation. The food regulator is entrusted with the safety of the whole population. I would say their job is even harder than the drug administration, because drug administration works with sick people. Here we're talking about everybody. And they, of course, have to be very careful. And here we are bringing them completely new technologies, bringing molecules that are approved for drugs, bringing them into meat. It's very hard for the regulator to take such risks. So a lot of the work that we as an agency do, and I lead this, we're doing a regulatory pilot with the Food Administration, with the regulator, looking together at startups from different technologies, both fermentation and cultivated meat, working together to create a procedure, a checklist. How do you evaluate such programs? How do you approve it? What sort of safety testing has to be done before it can be approved? And already all of this effort is making itself known. So we do have some 200 companies already in the alternative protein meat. Some of them in cultivated meat and milk have actually already raised or are in the process of closing 100, 150, $200 million rounds. So it's becoming serious. It's getting the attention. It's no longer small, food shop. This is big international business with a lot of science in that. And a lot of it also has to do with marketing. So GFI has been very, very successful in Israel, getting the attention. Our previous prime minister was the first to taste cultivated meat. And just a couple of weeks ago, before Glasgow, our president also had a chance to taste the first cultivated meat, all arranged by GFI Israel. So I'm very, very happy to partner. And that's what I said, private-public partnership. We never, with the government, never work alone. We always partner with NGOs, with academy, with venture capital, with large industry. Our incubators today are led by the largest food industry in Israel. So, and actually large food industries abroad as well are coming in. So we have today representation of a lot of large food industries from US, and I'm hoping that we'll also get to work with large Indian players. So I'm here to say, let's collaborate.
Thank you so much, Anya. Moving now to Arun. Arun, this is the creation of a sunrise industry from scratch. We've seen this already take place by playing a central role in building the telecom sector or the entrepreneurial ecosystem with NASCOM. We think the smart routine sector in the country can benefit from this wisdom and have an accelerated partner market. What are the key pieces of progress or an ecosystem that needs to emerge for an industry to reach maturity?
Thanks, Satvik, and Anya really has spelled out a lot of this. But let me start with a personal example. We became grandparents just a few months ago, and this was in the US. And we realized we needed a whole village to raise a baby. We didn't have the village, but for this effort for the smart protein industry, we need to literally create this village around us and have all parts of the ecosystem work with us. And GFI is certainly providing a key nodal point in this as being the purveyor of knowledge. I have worked also in the solar industry, incidentally, about a decade ago. And when we started, it was very similar. The price of solar power was five times the price of thermal power. It's probably the same in our industry of animal proteins, of plant-based proteins. But what did we do? We worked very closely with the government. I was personally very involved in that. I was in one of the first companies there. And we were able to get a renewable energy commitment done onto all the utilities to basically enhance usage. Otherwise, why buy at 5 times the price? So we need to work something similar, into my mind, in this space. Work with the industry. What we don't have, we have GFI, but what we don't have right now is a kind of a NASCOM equivalent organization. So I would encourage GFI and all the players here to think in terms of creating an organization which works on behalf of the industry, and the voice of so many is heard. If we had been a few people in NASCOM, few industries, nobody would listen. But we need to create that. And we need some subsidies and tax holidays. I remember in the IT industry, we got a 10-year tax holiday on the strength of creating employment. But government forego its tax on us so that it could build the future, and it's come completely correct. And that's what we need to do. And I would encourage us to do that. And what's missing next is the awareness in both the consuming public and government and the entire ecosystem. They're not aware of this. It's right now very, very exotic, if I can use that word. And again, as I said, we need something like a NASCOM equivalent to get this done for us. I remember I was part of this NASCOM committee when we had to get some things like even telecom sharing. Otherwise the rules didn't allow telecom sharing to be done in the beginning. So government really helped us at that point in time. We had some visionary bureaucrats like Dr. Vittal and others who helped us at that point. And the current people in the government are extremely, extremely interested in working. People at NITI Aayog and people at such places are very keen to work with industry to help to create this. We have a very, very receptive government. And I would say that with the PM having publicly stated that we'll be net zero by 2070, we must align with what we can do as an industry to help India achieve these goals. And the livelihoods that we can add is not just white collar workers like in the IT BPO industry, but we can go down right to the bottom of the pyramid in India and create livelihoods and extra jobs for them. We have seen green shoots, we need to speed that up. There's another example on awareness which I think I should use is the government of India started something called a Bureau of Energy Efficiency. This is about 15 years ago. And it is headed by, interestingly, Ajay Mathur. It was set up by Ajay Mathur, who's now currently the president of the International Solar Alliance, who's just got USA on board today. They spent, it's a very good use case of government money. They used to spend 25 crores of rupees in creating awareness on the star system. And guess what? It saved thousands of crores worth of generating capacity by creating awareness. So we need, as Anya said, government needs to help seed some of this in the beginning to create this awareness. But that will really help us when we want to spread this message. The next issue is really the access to products. And as Anya said, market forces will take that over. That is not for the government to do. And the good part is I've been involved with the VC and angel industry, and we have all the makings of that. There, you saw what the IPO kind of Nykaa did. And it's no coincidence now that with ESG now being the hottest thing going around, it's going to drive good funds into this space of ours. Next issue is technology. Again, to what Anya said, we have a very vibrant IIT and engineering and system where the awareness to do things with industry is much better than 20, 30 years ago. I myself am involved in setting up, guess what, a hospital in IIT Kanpur where I'm an alum. And the idea there is to create new medtech. But 20 years ago, the regulators of education, of medical and engineering were fighting each other and wouldn't allow a medical college to come up in an IIT. That's what we missed, but things have changed. And the last most important part is the human resources, which is the key element in building this industry. We need to put a lot of focus. I know GFI is doing a lot of that, but we need to work in that space to create the talent pool which will be required. As in the beginning, you saw that literally hundreds of thousands of new jobs will get created in this space. So we need to really focus on that space, which most people don't. And in my view, the stars are well aligned for us to create this ecosystem needed, and I'm ready to put my shoulder to this wheel to make it happen.
Thanks so much for that, Arun. I think all these learnings from Anya, from you, all point towards having a coordinated approach, having collaboration, having multidisciplinary areas integrated, and housing that all under a central mission that's probably led by the government initially until the market forces take over. Let's move on to you, Anand, now. As Anya and Arun said, we need this coordinated approach here, or it will take decades, and we really don't have that long. Our modeling indicates that industry and government coming together can change the equation hugely in terms of market size, export income, etc. And all that really translates into jobs created and positive environmental impact. Can you offer some examples from other industries, perhaps pharma or the agri sector, for how a coordinated push is happening?
Sure. In fact, if you look at many of these sectors, right, pharma is a good example. A lot of the investment as well as capability building happened on the back of very successful exports. Now, if I were to look at the food industry itself, frozen foods, if you look at it as a category, wasn't very big in India, right? It actually grew on the back of exports where you had large corporates exporting to the Middle East, for example, in marine processing. A lot of that happened on both the sides, right? On both the coasts, because of a lot of incentives around setting up marine processing facilities in Andhra, in Maharashtra, where we had large players like, say, a Marine Falcon or a West Coast. All of these players get very little of their revenue from the domestic market. It all comes from exports. Similarly, if we were to look at frozen foods, I mean, the large players, say an Alana, for example, a Sumeru, all of these players export a lot more than their domestic market, right? So why can't we learn from some of these sectors? A lot of it came from a couple of things which happened well. One is a lot of incentives were provided not so much by the central government, but at the state level, right? For food sector particularly, especially for driving food processing capacity, there needs to be something which happens in specific clusters, right? And these clusters need to have the right availability of inputs. We've seen that the government did try to set up a lot of food parks across the country. And one of the key areas which made a difference was the availability of the right input in the vicinity, right? So unlike many other products, food does not travel very well. And therefore, can you make the product available, the raw material available from the farm gate to the cluster in a cost efficient manner, right? So that's going to be critical in terms of how we develop clusters where processing for smart proteins can come up. The second area is also to look at, most of the previous speakers have touched upon it. There is a lot of intensity in terms of technology which is required. We have done a lot of technology upgradation in other sectors, right, which are exports driven. So, for example, textiles, the government had a lot of schemes to look at technology upgradation. We had R&D support being provided for places like pharma where tax breaks were given for launching R&D in the country. So similarly, can we do something where we can bring in this ecosystem of private and public partnerships, both through the educational institutes as well as private sector play to promote R&D together with policy and government push there. And the final area, when it comes to areas like food, it's also about awareness. It is also about demand generation, right? On the back of great exports, you need to look at the domestic market itself. India has, all the different climatic, agroclimatic zones represented. And given the variation that we have in climate and weather, etc., can we look at specific clusters specializing in specific inputs and in specific technologies, right? And that's where the state government can really make a difference. Can we take, say, example could be from the biotech industry. A lot of the fermentation-based processes are common across many of these sectors. So can we look at biotech clusters and see how we can add on and build on it by looking at food tech play there, right? So these could all be opportunities in terms of learnings from other sectors where we need to look at how private-public partnerships can be enabled for capacity building and investment promotion.
Thank you so much. I think in one question you highlighted and framed the challenges for us as well as the opportunities that we have in terms of, the clusters approach that you were talking about in fermentation. And of course, we have the biodiversity, the agri-biodiversity in terms of indigenous crops that's available in India for us to leverage. Let's move on to that from that. And we have these regional strengths in indigenous crops, and this would provide us the opportunity to diversify our sources, but also our incomes. But we, of course, need cautious optimism here. We need to address prevailing challenges in setting up these value chains locally and ensuring that enough resources are invested into research to make them viable ingredients in smart protein products. Arun, let's move on to you now. Surely there are other sectors like telecom that have faced similar challenges where they need to break new ground. Early on, it would have felt like magical thinking almost to imagine that we would have 33 Indian startup unicorns or billion-dollar companies emerging in just 2021 alone. What examples can you offer of taking a leap into the unknown and how things may turn out?
Thank you. Since you mentioned unicorn, I had the privilege of incubating India's first unicorn in Mobi in 2010 or 11. And now we are minting one a month or maybe one a week. I've lost count. And we actually created a second one called Glance. So it's very good that you started with that. And let me, before going into the past, I prefer looking into the future. So along with BIRAC, because I've been involved in founding Indian Angel Network. And we haven't announced it yet, but we should be coming out with something called Bio Angels, which is focused around this whole space, which is much wider than smart proteins. But that's the whole idea. BIRAC will fund us, and exactly what Anya said about government doing it. So they're providing the initial funding for 3 years. So that's going to be one of the places that we definitely want to, at least I'll make sure that this remains one of the big focus areas for us. And back to telecom, I don't know, many of you people may not have been born in 95 when we started telecom, but the price of telecom that time was 16 rupees a minute for incoming and outgoing both. it's unimaginable what we could do. But working along with the government, we were able to get the revenue, high fixed license fees changed to revenue share. All kinds of things were done, and we were able to scale. And now it's the lowest cost of tariffs in the whole world, and that's the benefit that we will get today. So we have enough examples like telecom, as I told you, and in solar where we've done this one. So we must work with government very closely in helping to build this ecosystem, and the government will do this. I am very positive about that. And now you can see even in solar, you're seeing the same example that it started slower than China, but now Adani and Reliance are buying Chinese panel manufacturers. And in telecom, since you again mentioned, Tata's have just bought Tejas, a device maker, and so we may have lost the 3G and the 4G generation to making anything new, but the 5G and the coming 6G, I can guarantee it'll be most of the innovations will come out of India because the TCSs and the company I incubated, Tech Mahindra, are deep into this whole space. So we have a huge opportunity. And lastly, as I said, with the ESG and climate commitments which are out there and the vibrant ecosystem which is there, the stars are absolutely aligned for us. And we should start with a strong focus on exports, as Anand said in the last one. Again, we've done it in pharma, we've done it in IT, and that's really the place to start from while we are building the nascent domestic industry. And there will be many more unicorns coming out in the space, but it'll probably take, hopefully it won't take 30 years as we've done now, but it'll happen in the next decade or so. And one of the areas which I thought I should talk about is that there are incumbents in the food space. Many are interested, but some of them, my guess is that some of them may not understand this whole thing and may fear a loss of market to something which is new. All I'm saying is that we should right now be cognizant of this fact and must work with the existing incumbents to see how do we make a win-win proposition to them. And we must work with the government on new definitions with the FSSAI, which is the Food Standard Authority, because there will be new standards for this industry. And if we don't change the standards to suit this new industry, there will be friction and there will be delays. So we have to work very aggressively, cooperatively with the regulator to build these new definitions of this new space. And to me, I would put as my personal thing, having been involved in solar and all these ones, that if we don't get a reaction from the existing players in meat and all these areas, that means we are irrelevant. So I'm hoping that we'll get a reaction, but a good reaction at the end and work with them. So my view is let's work together with all of these people and make this happen.
Thanks so much for that, Arun. I think you said it quite rightly. We don't really have a choice. We have the right ingredients in place, and we can't really sit around and wait for climate change and future pandemic to, ravage us. Let's move on to you, Anya. Now we've engaged with our friends in Israel, including His Excellency the Ambassador Dr. Ron Malka, for several years. Where do you see opportunities for India and Israel to work together on this? We're natural allies and have several bilateral programs. How can we further strengthen the Israel-India smart routine corridor and give the Indian ecosystem the kickstart that it needs?
Thank you. So first of all, Dr. Ron, the Minister of Economy, a minister that supports building out the food tech and the alternative protein sector together with us, and he remained a big partner. So we'll bring him back to this Israel-India collaboration program. And as you said, we have a lot of complementary strengths, our two countries, and we have a good history of technology transfer, both in agriculture and irrigation. So I think this is a natural partnership. Israel is much stronger in research and incubation, venture creation, and India can complement with building up the industry scale and cost economics. So I think there is a big partnership here. We should be focusing on entrepreneurial and scientific exchange programs. We have tools set up, we have collaboration set up. We're doing a lot of work focusing on this sector with other countries, and I think focusing on this in Israel-India collaboration programs would be a great plus. I just want to say one more thing. I definitely agree with what Arun said before me. The government has to come in. This has to be a joint effort because there is uncertainty, because there is some fear, there is some doubt. We can work together. Israeli government and Indian government will be happy to help set up programs similar to what we've done and have been successful, and also talk about things that haven't been successful. So building a collaboration both on the industry academic level and the government level, I think there is a lot of success to be done. And this area is not just climate. This is economy. So I don't know. Today, one of the leading the pillars of the U.S. venture capital industry was quoted saying that climate tech is a much bigger opportunity that internet ever was. Economic development opportunities. We'll be happy to be partners.
Great. Thank you so much for that. I'd like to stick with you for one more question. And we'll shift gears a little bit and discuss the value of the green economy. Many people make a moral case for the smart protein sector, and many make an economic or a purely pragmatic one. And Israel has made its priorities clear. But in an era of many promises to remake our economies to be more climate secure, what does success look like in 10 years? And what's Israel's end game here in smart protein? And what can we learn from this?
Okay, I'm not sure I can speak for Israel, but I will speak at least for myself. I think the reason we invest in this area and spend so much time on it is that, as I said before, this is a huge potential growth engine. And of course, it will help us reach climate goals. So the collaboration of reaching the climate goals and creating a growth engine, creating strong economy, this is the reason we're doing this. And Israel is a small country, and food industry is such that you really manufacture or you build food in this. We have to learn new language because you no longer grow food, you now build it or create it. So creating food is going to be done worldwide. But we can provide the ingredients, we can provide the secret sauce to building alternative protein food industry around the world and partner with the whole world on this. So this is the end goal. And on a personal note, and also the representative of a government, we would love to see this happen around the world. I would personally be very happy to participate in any effort around the world that will promote both creation of alternative protein industry, but also the growth of acceptance at the general public. Because at the end of the day, people who eat meat today will have to reduce meat and eat alternative proteins as well. And it's a big shift. And you don't do it because of climate on a personal level. You don't do it because of ethical consideration. You do it because this is a really tasty food. Yeah. This is going to be great, tasty food. We love eating it. This is my personal take.
Thank you so much. And I think this commitment from Israel, from you also, was really reinforced in the submission that Israel had, where it highlighted to the UNFSS summit, where it highlighted the need to shift to a higher proportion of plant proteins and sustainable alternative proteins, and promised to really dedicate a substantial budget to study the health and sustainability impacts of foods that are based in alternative protein. And this, they said, would inform the nutritional recommendations as well as the future national food security plan. I think we'll move on to the last question. Anand, let's move to you now. What are you really seeing from the big business ecosystem that is concrete in moving us towards this green economy beyond smart protein? And will it really translate here? We want to really move from platitudes to action as soon as possible. And we want to check with you, are you really hopeful that this would happen?
Sure, Satvika. So, if you look at what Anya just said, right, it's not just about the ethics and the morals, but it's also about it making good business sense. And therefore, how is it that you get the taste proposition right? How is it that you get the texture right? How is it that you build awareness and enough opportunity for people to consume and sample some of these products? Right, these are all going to be big determinants of how demand takes off. And I think there is a lot of interest, like Arun has also been saying, on ESG. And a lot of the ecosystem players in the agribusiness value chain are looking to impact the farmer in the value chain. They're looking to impact the different parts of the trade in the value chain. And hence, we will see that this can become a good opportunity. I mean, recently, for example, the World Economic Forum launched a campaign along with Deloitte, where we are trying to impact 100 million farmers across the world. Right, so these opportunities are going to be very relevant, right, from an ESG standpoint, for us to make a difference and at the same time contribute to livelihoods. And we saw a lot of interest across our different clients, right, whether they are in the FMCG space or they were in the staple space. A lot of them were contributing to impacting and improving livelihoods and ultimately improving the impact that we have on farmers and on the farm sector. So I think the corporate world is looking at this very seriously, and they will look at partnering with all of the different stakeholders involved. And it's not like I've been saying just India. The entire Indian Ocean Rim region, if you look at it during the pandemic, they all realize that food security is a big thing. And not all of them might have access to large farmland for animal husbandry to happen, right? And therefore, this also from a food security perspective impacts countries in Africa, in Middle East, in Southeast Asia. And therefore, India can also look at becoming a big player. And thereby, it's also an opportunity for food diplomacy. And we have, like I've said, the resources. We have a history of having done this similarly in the food sector itself and in other sectors. So I think corporate India is very seriously looking at this opportunity, and we will see more than enough avenues for venture businesses to develop and for investments to come into this space.
Thank you so much for these insights. On that note, we're almost at the close of this session. We have some great takeaways and plant based food for thought. The major one being that there is a need for a clear roadmap for action across science, business, and policy under a central mission for smart routine. And of course, working with mature ecosystems like that of Israel for mutual gains. With that, I'd like to really thank the panelists for building and bringing their valuable expertise to this discussion, and to all of you for being a great audience. We have an exciting next session lined up for you for building the talent pool with Akshay Vishnu Bhatt. But thank you so much for being here, and I will see you soon.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.